Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
Hi, my name is Adam Wilson. I'm a comic book writer based out of New Jersey, and today I'll be reading from my upcoming graphic novel, Last of the Pops, which is scheduled to come out in October. It is a graphic novel, but it also has epistolary elements into it. So it plays a lot with the imagery, the text, and how the two kind of work together. So I'll be reading two sections today. This first one is kind of an instance where the two complement each other really well. And obviously, since this is an audio podcast, you'll just be getting the one aspect of it, the audio reading. But the two things actually complement each other very well. And the text itself does stand on its own. So hopefully this should work. This chapter is called Formed a Band, a Rolling Stone interview with Jack Phillips, A&R for Perfect Edge Records. Yeah, people don't realize how lucky Skylar Chase was. We signed his band for Sincere Perfunctory to a 3-record deal, and his band had only been on the scene for about a year, so it was pretty good news. But then get this, the night they signed the contract, the guys go out to celebrate, end up having some big falling out and breakup. The ink wasn't even dry yet. Normally something like this happens, we'll just written them off, forgotten they ever existed. But Skylar, and don't ask me why he thought this was a good idea. He showed up at the studio the next day like nothing happened. He told the sound engineers the other guys were just running late and he wanted to get a jump start on recording his vocals, waiting for them. But by the time the news of what actually happened made it to our offices, he was already halfway through recording his tracks for One Fitful Night. Now, a stunt like that should have been a career killer. Any other artist would have been blacklisted for wasting the label's money like that. But honestly, after hearing the tracks he laid down, I didn't even care. No one did. I played it for my bosses, and they drafted a brand new contract the next morning. The tracks he recorded would be released as a 5-song EP, and the label had the option for up to 3 more albums if they were happy with the sales. All my years in the industry, I'd never seen anything like that. Then again, the talent like Skylar isn't something you come across every day. Looking back, it's funny though, I don't think the kid fully thought through his plan when he showed up at the studio that first day. As he was finishing his tracks a few days later, and it came time to record the bass, drums, everything else, you can see he was starting to panic a bit. It's like it finally sunk in that his bandmates weren't coming back, and he really was alone in all of this. But we rallied. I called in a few last-minute favors. In 3 hours, we had a team of studio musicians there rehearsing. And once everything was together, Skylar was a natural in the studio. The album was finished in a week. And sure, it was just an EP, but every step of the way, there were a dozen reasons it shouldn't have worked out the way it did. Yeah, history speaks for itself. One Fitful Night was the #1 single in the country the week it was released, and it stayed on the charts for 27 weeks. The world was waiting with bated breath to see what Skylar was going to do next. As now, this next section I'm going to read is a little bit earlier in the book, and it's one of those instances where the narrative, a journal entry from one of the main characters, and the text actually tell very different stories, but they actually kick off 2 very important aspects of this particular character's journey throughout the book. So this is I Want to Learn a Love Song, an excerpt from the journals of Caroline Herald. The Book of Love. We found love. Get ready for love. No ordinary love. Our love. Endless love. The best of my love. How deep is your love? I will always love you like a love song. She loves you. I love you, but I love me more. Love will tear us apart. Can't help falling in love with you. The King Jr. XL remix. When I was in high school, I had this friend who played keyboards in a band. During our lunch break, we'd sneak into the auditorium so he could mess around on the school's baby grand piano. For some reason, songs just sounded better on an instrument you could get in trouble for playing. Most days, I just sit there with my feet dangling off the edge of the stage, letting my mind wander as a swirl of notes stands all around the auditorium, trying to find their place amongst each other. Neither of us would really talk. We each had our own thing going on. It was just nice to do them in tandem. Every once in a while, though, there'd be this moment, this string of notes or a chord change that hit just so. A perfect combination that snapped me back to reality as if it was demanding to be heard. The notes would repeat over and over, slowly taking shape into a hook or a melody, and I swear I could feel them spread through my body. The transition from one note to the next would send shivers down my spine, pulsing in time with the music. It'd get to the point where I'd swear I could feel like lightning shoot from my fingers if anything got too close. That's usually the point I'd burst out laughing. It's not that there was anything particularly funny. My brain just didn't have a way to process this wave of overwhelming emotions in that moment, so it defaulted to laughter. My voice would echo through the auditorium, sometimes louder than the music, and that's when my friend and I would both suddenly become hyper aware of the other's presence. With anyone else, it would have been awkward, but we both knew a laugh like that doesn't just happen. It was a sign that we had something special. Years later, as an adult, I spent the better part of my career making a name for myself, trying to recapture those moments in that auditorium, tapping band after band from obscurity to play on the air in hopes they might actually capture the same kind of magic. Not that anyone ever knew that's what I was doing. One station called me the DJ with the golden ear. Another one said that I was the herald of alternative rock. Stupid marketing nicknames. When really I was just someone searching for another song that made me feel as deeply as those bits and pieces my friend cobbled together on a forbidden baby grand piano. Because looking back in those moments, as corny as it sounds, I swear it was the closest I'd ever come to falling in love. Being there, lost in a private little world, listening to my friend try and craft something meaningful with what limited musical ability he had. It was the most connected, the most intimate I've ever felt with another person. I don't know, maybe that's kind of sad, but really it was all I ever needed. It was a different kind of love song.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Inside the Minds of Authors. I am so excited you guys are joining us today. I have an amazing guest with us, so hopefully you guys are ready for this incredible conversation. If you're new to the podcast, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss a single episode. We're here every Monday night with a brand new book, brand new author, and a fabulous conversation. So hopefully you enjoy that reading as much as I do. And you're probably wondering, where do I get this book? Because I really want to see the art. But let's start. Hello, Mr. Adam. How are you?
Hello, I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you. Welcome on the show. Congratulations on the
Thank you.
upcoming book.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's a long time in the making, so I'm very excited.
Ooh, can't wait to start talking to our listeners. We are only a few months away from the release of this, so you're
Yep.
getting a sneak peek of what's happening. You
Yeah.
don't want to miss out. So, Adam, question that I have for all of my authors, I need to know,
Uh-huh.
where did this idea come from?
It's funny. It started from the title, and I don't really remember the context in which I thought of it, but I just remember the term "Blast of the Pops" just popped into my head. I remember thinking it was a very fun play on words of Top of the Pops, the old British like music show. I was always a fan of that show. I got introduced to some really cool artists over the years, just like stumbling upon performances that they had done there. And I was like, "Blast of the Pops, that's pretty cool. I wonder if anyone's ever used that for something." And so I Googled it, and sure enough, I couldn't find anything. So I said, well, I want to do something with this. I have no idea what it's going to be, but I like it. So I opened up a Word document. I labeled it Last of the Pops, and it just kind of sat there for a while. And I had no ideas. I had nothing going. But it's like, given the context, I knew it'd be something music related. And music was something that I always kind of tertiarily used in my writing. It was something that, I would write to different playlists that I would create for the different books I had. But I'd never really written specifically about music. So I was like, you know what? This is going to be the project where I write about music. And I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what format it was going to be. Traditionally, I primarily do comics, but I've dabbled in novellas, short stories, things like that. Over time, just became this like dumping ground for ideas, this Word document. I would just like jot down like thoughts about songs or, my relationship to different types of music. And then one of the things I remember seeing was my wife and I were driving home after a trip that we had gone on, and we were listening to a radio station that we don't really listen to that much. And it was like, oh, this is an iHeart radio station. And I was like, okay, iHeart radio station, whatever. And then we kind of moved out of that area into a new area where the radio station faded, and we moved into another one, and we were like, changed the radio station, changed formats. We were listening to something completely different. But again, eventually the call signal for it came through, and it's like, this is an iHeart radio station. I was like, huh, okay, it's not the same station, but I guess, there are companies that own lots of radio stations now. That was something I was familiar with because when I first graduated from college, one of my first jobs was working in the newspaper industry. And I started working in this newspaper industry right as it was about to kind of collapse in on itself. So it went from being this thing where every single town had their own local newspaper that was independently run, and that everyone had the weeklies, the dailies, all that kind of stuff. And I just kind of watched all of these big companies come in and buy up newspapers and shut them down or consolidate and switch formats and things like that, to the point where it was kind of like all the newspapers were run by like 2 or 3 big companies. That clicked something in my memory, and I was like, huh, is the same thing happening with radio? And sure enough, the more I started looking for this, the more I found, okay, yeah, this is an iHeart radio network. This is a Clear Channel Media network. And it was like, looking into it, I was like, yeah, all of radio is kind of now going the way of newspapers, where the stations that I was listening to previously now are similar formats, but owned by this company. And now half of their time is just these syndicated programs that are recorded elsewhere. So suddenly that changed what the things I was writing about in Last of the Pops. It wasn't just about like my relationship with music, but it was my relationship with how I was consuming music. Now it was like radio wasn't this reliable place to find new music anymore. I was leaning more towards Spotify. I was discovering bands by going into record shops and digging through the bins. So it kind of became this like conversation about how our relationship with music changes based on what's available to us. Then kind of adding a layer to that, I just ran that conversation of what happens when all the radio stations become consolidated, and then there are all these other avenues out there for people to consume music. Like, is there eventually going to come a point where radio is going to not exist anymore? At this point, the only real place that I listen to the radio, or I know a lot of people listen to the radio, is in the car. And I can very easily hook my phone up to my car now and play something off of Spotify. So it was like, when does that overhead of managing a giant radio signal and a radio station all like that become too much? And these companies are just like, let's just get rid of it. And so then the idea was like, what's going to happen next? Because this technology will still exist. These radio towers will still be out there in the world, but no one's going to use them. And it became all these bits and pieces. I still had all these conversations about music. I still had all these conversations about how we relate to music through technology. And then this idea of like, what's going to happen after radio goes away? I started to piece them together into like their own individual stories. I eventually found this through line of like, my wife had gotten me a biography of Jeff Buckley. He was kind of an up-and-coming musician. He had this big moment where he did a tribute concert for his father, and then he recorded his album, and right at the height of it, he disappeared. He drowned in, I think it was the Mississippi River, don't quote me on that, I'm not sure which one it was, but he drowned, and there was always this mystery about this allure about what happened to him, and like, what would have happened to him if he didn't, and he was able to kind of continue his music career. And I really like that idea, and that kind of like opened another can of worms. This has happened to so many musicians, like that idea of the 27 Club, where the people who just die way too early before it's their time, and like, what music career could they have had if they kept going? And so those things, like they were all these like independent ideas, but like that one particular one became like a through line that I thought, you know what, I could use this to kind of connect all these different ideas and create like one larger narrative that kind of speaks to all of them at the same time. And so over like the next few years, I just started kind of like compiling everything and playing with formats, playing with like, does this work as a graphic novel? Does it work? Should it be a novel? Maybe I'll do it as an epistolary novel where everything is just notes and things like that. And then I got really, really ambitious, and I decided to try and combine epistolary storytelling and graphic storytelling. And that's kind of the final route that it took.
Dear, I am in awe of all the pieces you have running together through this book. I was like, how are you going to tie this together? I'm sitting at the edge of my seat going, and you're tying this all how?
Yeah.
You have incredible topics, very much in tune to where we are today.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking about the radio in the car. I spent a lot of time listening to Sirius Satellite. You know what I mean? I wasn't even listening to the radio because I couldn't find anything.
Exactly, yes.
So you're touching on very things that we're all feeling. And I like the fact that you have this one consistent storyline behind it.
Yeah. And I think that was kind of the key, because they didn't fit together, but like the allure of the mystery surrounding like an artist who disappears before their time and what that could actually translate to. One of the things that in doing the whole looking into like the 700 Club, Tupac came up a lot, because he was killed, but then he released how many albums posthumously from like recordings that he had. And I was like, that's really interesting that like someone could continue a legacy like that after the fact. But at the same time, just like, what would that mean for someone who had never actually recorded that much before? And recorded them at a time when technology was very simplified and moving into an age where technology is very elaborate. The main character, Skylar, he came up at a time when he was a radio darling. His songs were being played all over the place. What would happen to his music afterwards? The one character, Caroline, whose journal entry I read, she was a radio DJ who kind of watched the fall of radio happen in real time. She kind of came up through the alternative rock era of the 90s, and then she was on top of the world at that point, and she slowly watched radio over the course of the 2000s, 2010s, just become obsolete. And so as a result, she kind of became obsolete. And like, where does the relationship between those two people meet? Because she obviously would have been playing his songs in the 90s, but where does that leave her and where does that leave him after the fact, after radio no longer existed? And so I then came up with this storyline where their stories kind of intertwine. I don't want to give away too much of the story, but it ends up leading into what becomes the driving thing for so many other characters, where now they are learning about this artist through the urban legends that surround him and kind of the mystery of what actually happened to him and what's happening now with his music.
Once again, pieces moving together, and they
Yeah.
flow so well because you have a social commentary on an entire industry and a way of life. Because let's be honest, how many of us grew up listening to the radio?
Yeah.
And now you're asked this and you're like, not really. So you're
Yeah.
talking about a way of life, how we changed drastically to adjust
Yeah.
to the times.
Yeah.
With a very strong story of, I was thinking of Nevada and, think
Yeah.
like Tupac, all these
Exactly.
artists that I'm like, what if? Great conversation. I love the fact that you were able to tie it together.
Yeah. Thank you.
As an author who does straight novels most of the time, how
Uh-huh.
did you make this into a graphic novel with this story? How long did it take? You keep saying a couple of years. I'm like,
Yes.
sounds like a lot of work.
It was. So the writing itself took about 5 years. Like I said, hearing that title, creating that Word doc was probably 16. And so over the next 5 years, that's when I was doing all of the writing. And then when I finally got the script to a good point, it was like the next 3 years was finding an artist and collaborating with it. The approach was very different from anything I've ever done before because, like I said, I really liked epistolary storytelling, and I liked that with epistolary storytelling, it's you give bits and pieces through different forms of media. And because this is a book that takes place over a technological shift where we're moving from a very analog society to a very digital society, it made sense to play with different medias. Some of it are newspaper articles, others are podcast transcripts. There are magazine interviews, radio interviews, things like that. And they all play a different piece in it. It then took time to figure out how that was going to work graphically, because one of my strong suits in my previous novels was dialogue, and I wanted to see if I could do this without like leaning too heavily on dialogue. So what I ended up doing is I tried to structure it like a block of music videos. I can remember music videos had that period where everything was like a mini movie, and the song was something that played over it and set the tone for it, and then the actual movie was something that played out. And sometimes they were, straight one-for-one connections of, this is a story about a guy and a girl falling in love. This is a mini movie about a guy and girl falling in love. And then other times there was this real dissonance where the song and the video didn't really match up that well, but it was in that difference between the two that you really saw the connection. And so I tried to play with that, where every single chapter is, like I said, diary entry, journal entry, some kind of media that exists. Like I read it, it could be read on its own as its own individual thing. And then graphically, other elements of the story unfold where sometimes it's a perfect complement to what's being read. So that the first section, it was very much as he's telling the story about assigning Skylar's band to the label, you actually see the night of party where they get in the fight, break up, and Skylar shows up at the studio the next day. So it's very much complementary to what's being read and what's being seen. But then that first section, they're two totally different stories. So it's this journal entry where Caroline is kind of reflecting back on this moment in her youth where she was kind of connecting with a friend. But the scene that's actually playing out visually is her breaking into an abandoned radio station and kind of reactivating it and setting it up to start broadcasting something. So two very different things, but like the text and that part of it sets a very important tone for like what her personal journey is, like what her emotional journey is going to be through the course of the story. And the visuals set a very important tone for what her actual like physical journey is going to be, like what she's doing through the course of the book.
can understand why this book took a while to put together because you
Yeah.
have so many things happening, so many different styles, which I love. Who is your illustrator for this book?
So I've actually worked with a few people, and I did that very intentionally. So I worked with a Mexican artist named Dr. Dimas for the primary artwork. I really loved his artwork because it actually pulled in so many influences that like I've had of where music and comics, music and art overlap each other. So like Love and Rockets, the Hernandez brothers, the Gorillas with Jimmy Hewitt, and just lots of different things like that. His style is very reminiscent of that while still being very much his own. It doesn't feel like a copy of it. It invokes that kind of feeling. And then I worked with for a few different pieces of it. So there's a character who story we follow, and she doesn't have narration. So hers are kind of like the instrumental songs, and it's just pages from her sketchbook because she's a street artist. And so over the course of the book, we see sketches that she's done telling a story in a different way. And so for that one, I wanted to have a completely different look, a completely different feel. So it actually felt like something outside of the normal narrative, even though it's her story within the narrative. And so with that one, I worked with an artist named Dapit Jamor, and he's based out of Indonesia. He has a very cool manga-ish style, which again is very slightly different from the other artwork. It gives its own life to these pages and makes them feel very much their own. And then lastly, I had this one element that I really wanted to include in the story, but I had no idea how to do it until the book was almost done. And then I kind of had that eureka moment of, we need one more scene, and it needs to be completely different from everything out there. As we were structuring the book, my editor and I, we said, you wrote this to feel like a block of music videos, but there's no 50 video block out there. You know, it's a lot of chapters. Like you would never sit through that many music videos in a row. And I said, well, how about a mixtape then? It works pretty well that way too, because the story is like a mixtape. You know, you make a mixtape for someone, you're trying to tell them something. You don't really go out and say it explicitly, but you find hints that you can put in songs that kind of express. I mean, I've done that for girls that I had crushes on. I don't know how many other people have done that. Book kind of works in that same way, where these little bits and pieces that kind of tell the story, but it makes you do the work to put it together in the end. And once that kind of clicked into place, I was like, there needs to be one more thing. And like, because we have all the songs, we have instrumental songs like the ones that Dapit did, we have the rest of the larger stories that Dr. Dimas did. But what about the white space? Like, what about that? You hit play, there's that long pause in the beginning of each side before the music kicks in. There was this one little piece that I wanted to include about graffiti on trains, because in a way, that and radio are very, very similar, because it's a person putting something out there and then just letting it go. And the train will travel across the country, and over that time, it's going to hit all these different places throughout the country, and every single person that passes that train will see the graffiti on it. In the same way that, you know, a person will broadcast something on the radio, and it's just going to go out into the ether, and people are going to pick it up, but you don't necessarily know who. I love that parallel between the two different things, especially thinking in terms of the one character who's a street artist and having that be kind of the thing that inspired her to pick up the spray paint and go out there and start doing this, and also in the way that it kind of ties back to what her larger story is, intertwined with all the other characters. And so I found an artist out of Italy, Erica Paratore. She's very new. She's actually just graduated from art school, but she has a very cool style, very different from the other two. Like hers is the white space, you know, hers is this thing that's completely separate from the rest of the thing, but it appears twice in the story, and it works as this like through line that really ties in some of the themes of the book and some of the character actions, and you kind of get like this additional layer of backstory for the one character through that.
This is a beautiful experience, not just visually, but you can feel it, you can hear it, you
Yeah.
can listen to the music as you go through the pages. So, listeners, you
Yeah.
need to check out this book. Mr. Adam, tell us, where can our listeners find you, where they can learn more about the book? Release is coming in October. Tell us.
Yes. So the book is published through Read Furiously Publishing. And so you can go to readfuriously.com. It has information on the site. It's available wherever books are sold. So, you know, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart, all the places. So hopefully at your independent bookstore, that's the first place I would go to find it. Yeah, it's coming out October 15th. I'm trying to kind of share like different thoughts and inspirations behind it on social media as well, kind of leading up to it, so people can kind of get some of like this elaborate background that I've spent the past 5 years doing. So I'm doing that on Instagram. My handle is amwilson81. And I'm trying to compile as much as I can on my website, lifeinasplashpage.com. So you're more than welcome to check that out as well.
Awesome. I love it. So, dear, before you leave us,
Yeah.
let's hit the lightning round. Let's see how you
Okay.
do.
Okay. All right.
Easy peasy. Don't think
All
too
right.
much about it.
Okay.
Juice or water?
Water.
Candlelight dinner or breakfast in bed?
Well, breakfast anytime, really, but breakfast in bed.
Nice. Superhero or villain?
Superhero.
Ebooks or print?
Print, but it doesn't matter in the end, as long as you're reading.
I love it. So this is a little different. Let's see how you do.
Okay.
What character, it can be a human, animated, whatever,
Okay.
best fits your personality?
Oh God. I don't know. I want to say Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec, but I know I'm not that jaded, and um, that's just the person I wish I was. I don't know who I actually would be. That's a tough one.
Well, you at least are there. You have a hope. So we'll
Yes.
go from there.
Okay.
Dear, it has been a pleasure chatting. I'm so excited about this
Oh,
project.
likewise.
Congratulations again.
Thank
Do you
you.
have any closing remarks?
No, this has been a great show. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like I blabbled on for a whole lot of time, but hopefully it was enjoyable. So thank you.
I'm so educated about different things and so amazed by your process. So I enjoyed it. I know our listeners did as well. Congratulations again. Can't wait for the release. To our
Excellent.
listeners, go ahead, check out Mr. Adam. Check out this book. It's an amazing experience. You're truly going to enjoy. And remember, we'll be back next week with another fabulous authors. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.